before the horrific events took place with this follower that I'm about to tell you in a second, they said they only really noticed one sign that something was off in their house. They said they could feel something, but it wasn't like the classic way you would think you would feel an entity. It just felt like a rush of energy. So I'm curious to know if you guys have ever experienced paranormal activity like that as well. So on this night, everyone has went to bed in their home and the follower is sitting in the living room watching TV, just playing on their phone. They think they see something kind of move out of the corner of their eye, but they don't see anything, so they're like, it's late, I'm definitely tired, and they just go back to playing on their phone. Well, they feel something lift up their ponytail behind them. So the follower was like, something's definitely in here, but I think it's just trying to be playful, and I'm just gonna ignore that. And nothing else happened that night. So the next day, they bring it up to their sister, and their sister had never really experienced anything, but they believed them, and the sister said, let's call him Charles. Feels like a Charles to me. So after days, weeks of hearing knocks and taps around the house, they decide that they want to try to contact Charles. They want to talk to him. So they go into their sister's room and they walk through the party streamers that are covering the doorway, and they decide to do it in there. They sit down in the beanbag chair and try to get the nerve up to do what they need to do, and when they look up into the fully lit hallway, they see a hand slide right by. So they out loud say, was that you, Charles? They then notice the streamers that are hanging in the doorways start to move around, and they couldn't find any explanation for this. No windows were open, no AC was on, nothing. So they found a way to communicate with using yes and no questions, and they were able to talk to Charles. It seemed like he always wanted to, he was just waiting to be acknowledged. The sister said a few days after that, her streamers would randomly move around a bunch, and she would say, you know, is that you, or you here? And they would move really fast and then stop. They've caught pictures of Charles with their phones. They've seen him peep around corners. He is always with them, and they don't think he wants to cause any harm, but he's just always there. Listen, between straight up haunted locations and ancient creatures marching around in the forest, Southwest Virginia is a creepy place. I grew up here. I still live here. I know how terrifying it is. But even though I've experienced it firsthand, getting stories sent in to me that others have experienced here is still quite terrifying. While this story may not be as scary to you, it horrified me. But that's because I live here. I think you'll still find enjoyment out of it though, and maybe a little bit of fear. So crucial information to the story that you probably know, but in case you don't, the Appalachian Mountains run straight through Southwest Virginia. Straight through it. I am in the Appalachian Mountains, and so is this person that wrote in the story. Keep that in mind. So this follower that wrote into me's grandparents actually live here on like a 140-acre farm. So they come in to visit with them a lot, and whenever they're here, they help feed the livestock, the pigs, all of that. They feed them a few times a day, and one of those times is at night. So here in Southwest Virginia, in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, they gotta be outside at night sometimes. And that's where this story takes place. So on this particular night, they go out, they're feeding the cows, and they do a little head count just to make sure everyone's there, and a mama and her baby cow are missing. So 2 cows are unaccounted for. So they start going around, riding around the 140 acres to try and find these cows. They find something all right, but it's not the cows. They find something that looked human enough, but just not quite right, standing in the middle of the road. They shone their lights and honked their horn at it, and it eventually left out of the road. But they were like, what was that? And just the off chance that it could be an intruder or just something that's going to hurt the animals, they immediately go back to the house and get their grandfather, and they set out on 4-wheelers to try and catch whatever this was. And boy, did they catch it. Caught it making a snack out of one of those cows is what they did. And it stopped snacking just long enough to turn and stare at them. So they immediately knew that is not something that they can even mess with right now. So they go and herd all of the other animals into the barn so that they're safe and go back home for the night, because you literally can't do anything. You can't do anything. You need to get inside. You need to get your animals safe. You're done for the night. So they go to bed, try to get some sleep, and they hear the most unnatural, unholy, ungodly scream that they have ever heard in their life. And it's so alarming it prompts them to call the police. The police and them searched, and all that could be found was 2 cows that had had their lives taken. Thankfully, nothing like that ever happened since on that farm, but Connecticut is said to be one of the most haunted states in the entirety of the United States. So if someone tells me that they experienced something in that state, I typically believe it. That and like West Virginia, I'm like, okay, you definitely did. So when this person wrote in to tell me that they had an experience with what they wholeheartedly believe is a djinn, I was locked in and scared. Now, before we get into the story, from what I gathered, and someone that knows more can definitely correct me, a djinn is a lot like a mimic in the sense, except it has some differences, but it definitely has a lot of similarities. I just wanted you to know what it's kind of like so that you can picture how horrific this story was with me. So this occurred when the follower was 16 and they left their family's home to just walk outside and get some fresh air. And while they're just standing there, they hear this really strange noise and they decide, I'm gonna go investigate it. So they start walking through the surrounding woods of that home. As they're investigating, they come face to face with what resembled their grandfather a little bit, except for the stretched out mouth and the beady little red eyes. They quickly turn and run away back to that house because they don't want any part of what that was. They do remember when they went back to that house that they just felt overcome with emptiness. Like nothing was there. They were a hollow shell of themselves. Now, I hope they never had another encounter. I think that they handled that as well as they could have in that situation, but that is scary. So you live in the Scottish Highlands, and every single night without fail at around 3:15, 3:16 in the morning, you are hearing a very specific sound. Now you can't really describe it, but if you had to associate it with something, it sounds like something or someone is marching up and down your hallway, banging pots and pans together. What do you do? Well, when I first read that, I honestly had no idea. I assumed it was some poltergeist that really wanted everyone in the house awake. But they said that following this sound, they will hear a whistle, and every alarm bell in my head went off. They said they believe that it is something's way of taunting them, and I wholeheartedly agree. It's definitely trying to get a reaction, trying to wear them down, and things of that nature. And I don't think that it is the thing from the woods. I don't think it's that. I think it's an entity that knows that deep-rooted fear that is trying to feed off of it. So could be a crafty poltergeist. It could just be a mean entity. It could be anything. So my advice, on top of completely ignoring it, would be to cleanse the space and make sure that thing knows that it is not welcome in that house. Especially if it's gonna be banging invisible pots and pans together. What are you doing? It's 3 a.m. The picture that I'm gonna show you at the end of this video has caused a lot of technological issues with the person who sent it and myself, so I just wanted to give you that warning. This is what they and myself believe is a cryptid that was caught on camera. Do with that information what you will. If you don't want to watch this one, I totally understand it, and if you are in an area that's more prominent to those things, I would kind of suggest against it if it's at night. They said they sent this story in because they want everyone to know that these things can be anywhere, as this took place in Canada. So let's get into it. So this story doesn't belong to the person that sent it to me. It actually happened to their cousin, and they told it to me. So the cousin is laying in bed trying to go to sleep one night, and they hear this loud noise. Like, it is so loud that it jolts them up and it jolts their dad up, who runs into the room and is like, did you hear that? So they say, yeah, I heard it. I don't know what it is. And the dad's a firefighter, and he was like, I think that was a car crash and we need to go check, because it's a small town. He just wanted to be helpful. The cousin's like, I am going too. I'm not staying in this house. So they put on their jackets, they open the door, and they are met with what sounds like scratching on the top of their house. Now, they live in a wooded area. It wouldn't be weird for an animal to be up there scratching. But then they look into the trees and notice something strange. And the cousin locks eyes with it, which causes it to start wobbling towards them. They use the word wobbling. I imagine like a baby deer trying to walk for the first time type of walk. The dad and the cousin quickly get inside, lock the door, and eventually end up falling asleep. I don't know how, but they eventually do. And when they do, they sleep for an entire 24 hours. And when they wake up 24 hours later, they are covered with weird bumps and scratches. Now, they didn't tell me how they got this picture. I don't know if it was from a trail cam or what, but here is the picture that they said goes with the story that they captured. I did have weird stuff happen when I tried to save it. I don't know, but here is that picture. Like I said, you've been warned. If you don't want to see it, scroll on, but here it is. So the question is, can they leave the woods and just walk right up and even right into your house at night? Well, let's talk about it. But first, I want to give you the story that inspired this thinking. So this follower wrote in to let me know that this experience happened to them. It happened to them at around 3 in the morning whenever they were getting home from work, and they noted that they are petrified of the woods. So they park as close as they can to the house and, quickly but calmly get inside every single night. And this night was no different. So on this particular night or morning, they enter their home and immediately hear something knocking. And they think they know what room it's coming from. And they're like, oh, my husband's messing with me. So they round the corner, go in that room, no one's there. And they're like, okay, definitely heard a knock, definitely think it's him messing with me. So they decide to wipe that from their brain, somehow they forget about it, and then they go about their night and they're getting ready to go to bed, and they hear the knock come from somewhere else in the house. So they're like, oh, he's moving around in secret. This is not funny. And then she lets them know. So they round the corner where the knock came from again. Nothing. There is nothing there. They go upstairs and everyone is fast asleep, including the husband. Now, do I think that this was something that lurks in the woods that got into the house? I don't. I think it was another entity that might have been channeling what the things in the woods do to try and get a rise out of this person, but it's probably just an entity passing through. But if it was something with negative intention, that is alarming because they will prey on what scares you the most, and they have an undeniable fear of the woods. And if they've been watching for a while, they know that, and they might be using that to their advantage. So, if I was them, I would keep an eye on activity, maybe do a cleansing, but definitely keep an eye on that. Don't let two mirrors face each other ever. Don't ever do that. And here's a story on why, because you guys know I always bring stuff to back up what I'm saying. So this story comes from a follower who is convinced that something negative is attached and following their sister, and they did make a note that it started with two mirrors facing each other. So let's get into the beginning. So one night the follower's laying in bed and they hear a loud crash and shatter coming from their sister's room. So they get up and run in there, and there are two mirrors facing each other in that room. It's been like that for a second. One of them has shattered. Completely shattered. So after this, both they and their sister started experiencing really strange things. Doors would open and close on their own, and they would have horrifically paralyzing dreams. But the most unnerving happened to their sister and their boyfriend one night. So they had parked the car and gotten out, and they parked the car on an incline to where the door that the sister's side was on was pointed down. So the door stayed open whenever she got out. She walked away from the car. They heard a noise, looked back, and watched as this door that was slanted down, gravity's not going to let this happen, closed. It closed. Truck was slanted, car door closed. How? Tell me how. To me, it sounds like something escaped that mirror. Maybe it broke it on the way out. Maybe it broke it because it didn't think it would have to go back if it did break it. I don't know. Please don't let your mirrors face each other. So this follower wrote in with two stories, one pretty tame and the other one pretty nightmarish. Which one do you guys want to hear first? You can't tell me, so I'm gonna hope that you said pleasant first because that's what we're doing. So when the follower was young, the family moved into a new house that was way back from the city, just kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Well, this story occurred one night when they were sharing a room with their sister. They were on the top bunk while their sister was on the bottom bunk. That's not really important, but I am setting the scene for you. They said they're trying to go to sleep and there's lights on in the room. It's not dark by any means, but they see a bright light drown out every other light in the middle of that room. The light starts to look like a male figure, and it didn't scare them at all. It felt quite comforting. They don't tell anyone about it until years later, and when they are telling their mom, they can sense the same presence standing behind them, resting their hand on their shoulder. That one's still kind of creepy to me, but that's the pleasant one. Now let's get into the not so pleasant one. The night before a field trip, the follower and their friends decided to make a homemade Ouija board and take it with them the next day. So they made it out of cardboard and paper. Homemade Ouija board stories are never good. They're never good. They're always so bad. So the next day, before the class leaves on their field trip, the friend group decides to find a dark corner in the room, go over to it, and play the Ouija board. And they were not getting a response. So a few friends got up to go get food, leaving just the follower and another friend to keep trying to get a response. And eventually they did. They asked if anyone was there, and that planchette slid right over to yes. So the follower immediately thinks that it's the friend messing. They look up, and that friend is already tearing up. So obviously it is not them. They ask what its name is, and it begins spelling out something, but they end up having to stop mid this thing spelling out its name. So they thank them, say goodbye, close the session, but they think that they may have gotten upset that they couldn't finish saying what they needed to say because of what happened next. They said the gust of wind blew by them, like a noticeable gust, and then the planchette forcefully went to goodbye. So they were like, okay, alrighty then. So it's later on, they're all on the field trip, and a few other kids find out that they had a Ouija board, and they're like, we want to play. So they get out the Ouija board again, go find a dark corner, and start playing, and nothing was happening. So they decided to do what worked for them the last time, which was those two friends play it alone, and they did get a response. They were even telling them exact ages of people that no one else really knew, and it was freaking everyone out. They said goodbye, threw it away in the trash can, and left it behind. Today I'm bringing you a story from East Tennessee, which, fun fact, is where I was born, so let's get into it. Now, East Tennessee is very much a part of the Appalachian Mountains. Just keep that in mind. Now, this comes from a follower who grew up on their grandparents' property that was pretty spooky, but the grandfather was really adamant about blessing homes and keeping up protections. So luckily, the inside of the house was relatively safe, but that outside. Anytime the follower has to go outside at night, they will keep their head down or try to remain in the car for as long as possible, because it's just not right out in these woods at night. It's not. I'm sorry, it's creepy. So the follower remembers just being horrified of this property as a child. So now let's flash forward to when they inherited the property recently. So it's move-in day. They're trying to get the house ready so that they can get everything in and it's not as stressful when they feel like something is watching them from outside. So they take blankets and put them over all of the windows so that they feel a little bit better. And they lean their head back up against one of the covered windows and end up falling asleep. So they woke up later that night and they're half asleep, half awake with their head still leaning against this window, and they're hearing tapping on that window, followed by talking, but they don't recognize the language. They described the feeling as it trying to force its way into their mind. Like, they said they felt like they could feel it trying to make its way in, which is a horrifying way to describe anything. They finally snapped themselves fully awake, and they said the feeling that was surrounding that room and themselves was horrific. So they get up, don't dare look out the window, and calmly walk to the bathroom where there was no windows and stay there for the rest of the night. The next morning, they get up immediately and do a blessing of the house. They make sure to lock all of the doors and windows spiritually because they want to make sure whatever's out there can never get that close to them again, and I don't blame them. This story was sent in to me by a follower that takes place at their grandparents' farmhouse that was built by their grandparents when they were in their 20s. So this home at this point is around 50 to 60 years old. Now, something important to note about this house is that it has a wooded area surrounding a few parts of it. So this story takes place when the follower was visiting their grandparents for the holidays, and they had a cousin there as well. And they were spoiled rotten. They had so many toys to play with at their grandparents' house. And one in particular was a little toy car that they loved. And it wasn't just one of those, like, what are they called? What are those little cars called? Matchbox cars? Oh my god, is that what they're called? I had them growing up, I don't remember the name. Anyways, it wasn't one of those. It was one of those fancy ones that are like, you can drive. That you sit in and you drive around. I had something kind of like that, but you had to pedal it. Like, I had a little tractor. It wasn't like electric or anything, and you had to pedal it. Which is ironic because I can't even ride a bike, so I don't know how I didn't just end up on the side of a hill. Every time that the two kids played with this toy, something strange would happen, and it always happened around that straight stretch that was surrounded by woods. They would go a few feet and the car would just turn off. They would push it a few feet back and then it would drive like normal. It was literally just that one spot was just like a dead zone. Another strange thing that would happen on this farm was involving the chickens. Now, on this land sat a big old chicken coop that was typically empty, but that's not because they weren't trying to keep it full. No matter what they did, they would have 15 to 20 chickens at a time, and they would all pass away at the exact same time. And that's just strange that it's all of them. None of them are surviving, and it keeps happening. No matter what they do to prevent it, it keeps happening. But for the first and second time that this happened, the grandparents said they thought it might have been a fox the first time, maybe a rattlesnake the second, but it's really unlikely that a rattlesnake would, do that to all of them, they think. But on the third time that it happened, the grandparents literally had no explanation. But it's possible that they were just covering that up to not scare their grandkids, and they knew exactly what was happening. So, sounds like that land was inhabited by something before they built their house there. At a very young age, this follower lost their father, and they said that as far as they know, their father was never involved in any witchcraft or anything, but it just felt like the spiritual protection that was in their house was gone the second he was. The first occurrence happened not too long after his passing, actually, when the follower woke up to immediately look down the dark hallway out of their room. Like, they said it felt like their eyes were just snapped that way, and they saw a dark shadow figure with red eyes and a big toothy grin standing there. They froze in absolute fear, rightfully so, and watched as this shadow figure grew to the size of their door frame. And eventually, they called for their mom, because of course you're going to call for your mom. The mom ran in there, and what do you know? This thing has just disappeared. This scared the followers so bad that they slept in their mom's room well into their teen years. But even being in their mom's room did not keep this creature away. Now, as an adult, the follower has to have the bedroom door closed and the TV on to be able to sleep. They would also see a lot of shadow animals, like shadow figures of animals in their home, but it wouldn't be like little cats and dogs, it would be like tigers and lions. But they weren't just showing up to be there, they were literally there as like a guard, because they would follow the follower from their bedroom down that dark hallway where that thing was, all the way to their mom's bedroom. So it's like they were walking them. What it sounds like to me is something really negative latched onto that grief and fed off of it. And those animals were there as a protector. But imagine going outside to take a picture of the northern lights and being so excited, going back inside, looking at that picture, and then something isn't right. Something is there that shouldn't be there. Let's get into the story of how this picture came to be. So this occurred recently in Maine, and there is quite literally no reason for that to look the way it does. Nothing else in the picture is blurry, nothing was there to make it look like that. It just is. So the follower and their family recently moved into this house, and they said they've kind of suspected from the beginning that it's haunted, but this was some pretty concrete evidence for them. What do you guys think of that picture? I think it's spooky. Cozy and turn a light on possibly, because I am here to read you a very scary story that was sent in to me. This story is titled, "If You're Going Into the Woods at Night, Make Sure That You Have Friends That Will Trust You No Matter What." I come from a family who have always been sensitive to the paranormal. My old house in Utah was haunted, so I got very used to this feeling of a spirit. I currently live in upstate New York. Just down the street from my house is a patch of woods that me and my friends have always liked to venture into. We almost have the entire woods memorized at this point. This happened at around 3:30 p.m. in the winter. It gets dark at around 4 up here. Me and my two friends were bored and thought we'd walk to the woods but stay in a more open area. The entire walk there was fine, but as soon as we got to where the actual woods started, I began to feel uneasy. I shrugged it off because, dark woods, who wouldn't be at the least bit uncomfortable? We began to walk around, and I think we were there for around 30 minutes. We had to get out our flashlight because we could barely see 5 feet ahead. I should probably mention that the only dangerous wildlife around my house is coyotes, which are still rare. We decided to loop around this larger patch of trees, but my friends found a little patch that we hadn't seen before. We all decided to walk down it just a little bit to see where it went, thinking it was possibly a shortcut. I felt really uncomfortable the entire time, but as we started down the path, I was met with a feeling I can only describe as heavy. It was so intense I had to immediately stop in my tracks. Speechless under this immense feeling of doom, something was over here, and it wasn't an animal. After that was probably a couple of seconds. It felt way longer. I called out to my friends that had kept me walking to come back immediately. They didn't take me seriously at first, but as soon as they recognized the fear in my voice, they came back to check on me. They asked what was wrong, and I said something was unfriendly, and I did not want us going that way. One of my friends was completely lost in what I meant, but the other quickly picked up and asked, "Do you sense a spirit?" They were aware of my family's sensitivity. I didn't have to say anything else. He grabbed my other friend by the arm and quickly sped walked out of the woods and back to my house. As soon as I got back home, I just cried and collapsed into my mama's arms. I'd never felt so scared. Needless to say, when we go into the woods, we take a different path to avoid that area. Yikes. I happened to scroll across this video the other night, and it chilled me to my core. So now you have to see it too. Listen, I want to start this off by saying, I don't know if this is real. I have no idea. I have no idea if any video on TikTok is real, but it scared me. Because I know what's out there, and I know that there's a possibility that this is a real encounter caught on camera. So let's get into it. So it looks like this footage comes from a dash cam on a dark road. Looks like a dark country road out in the middle of the woods. And they caught something in the middle of the road. And it looks human enough, but it's walking real strange. It's standing real strange. It's moving around like so many stories that I have heard of walkers. And I'm not saying that's what it is, but I am just saying that, like, of all the characteristics that I know a walker has, this one has like 90% of them. So, I'm going to show you the video. Do with it what you will. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if it's fake. I just know it scared me. Today, let's talk about a house that is so haunted that it impacted the friend of the grandmother's granddaughter. It's not even staying within the family of haunts at this point. It's impacting everyone. Let me tell you the story. So right off the bat, this home is haunted by the spirit of the grandmother's ex-husband. I would love to know the story on why he is in that house. I guess he lived there at one point. That would make sense. But, that was really interesting to me right off the bat. Now, outside of the ex-husband, who really didn't do anything but walk around the hallways and stairs, there is a very negative feeling in the basement. And when the grandmother's long-term boyfriend passed away in the home recently, that negative energy got worse in that basement. So the follower's friend and their husband lived in this home, and the friend experienced a ton of paranormal stuff, but the husband really didn't. And he didn't believe in ghosts at all, especially like the darker side. But let's get into what happened to the follower when they agreed to babysit the friend's kids in that house overnight. Opportune time to run around, children. So the follower has trouble falling asleep at night. They have insomnia, so that's not really a red flag. But it's like 2:30 in the morning and they close their eyes just trying to fall asleep when they hear something walking up the basement stairs. They were like, you know what? There is something in that basement. I know that. I've been told that. It is frankly none of my business. I'm gonna ignore that and go to sleep. Are my cats fighting for their life in the kitchen? Wednesday? Are you okay? Okay. I feel like I had an actual conversation just now. Anyways, so they close their eyes, they're trying to fall asleep, and they feel a cold hand cover their mouth and nose completely. They can't breathe. They can no longer get any oxygen in because it's being held on so tightly. So their eyes burst open and they're swinging around their arms and legs. They pop up and nothing is in that room. So luckily nothing else happens that night. They go on, they go home after the parents get back. And a few days later, the friend calls the follower and they're kind of panicking. They're like, hey, I'm experiencing stuff. There was like 3 knocks and it was no one. No one did it in the house. I don't know what's happening. Another friend of the friend stayed in this house after that and woke up with a burning pain on their stomach inside, and there was a scratch, like a very prominent scratch there. But not just 1, 3 scratch marks. 3. After this, they see a dark shadow figure. They run and wake up the friends, like the parents, and they think someone broke in, so they're looking all around the house, and there's nothing there. There is nothing there other than the culprit of those 3 scratches and probably the 3 knocks. And probably the suffocation. So they're wondering what this could be because it's not acting like a regular shadow figure. And I have to agree, regular shadow figures don't really do that. They're typically not going to try to hurt you. So what I think is this is a very negative energy that has been just marinating in the basement, and the grief from a long-term boyfriend passing in that house probably gave it all of the energy it needed to be extremely powerful. So with this needs to come cleansings and banishments. I would start off with a cleansing, open up all the windows in the homes, use an incense you like, a smudge stick, a selenite stick, whatever your little heart desires. Go through the home, say that negative energy is not allowed there. Ignore things within reason. I understand when they're causing harm, you really can't, but if you can, ignore it. And if the cleansing doesn't work, then we're going to have to move on to banishments, is what I think personally. Yeah, shadow figures don't do that. So if you're seeing a shadowy figure and it's causing harm, it's not a shadow figure. Rather than stopping and getting a hotel on this night, the follower made a decision to drive the 8 hours back home. They had just driven down from Canada to go to upstate New York and drop their friends off in New Jersey. And rather than sleeping in a hotel bed, they just wanted their bed. So they drove back in the middle of the night, which meant they would be driving through the Poconos very late at night. And if you don't know, the Poconos are in the Appalachian Mountains. So let's get into what they experienced. They said everything was fine until around 3 in the morning, which is very common for these things, when they noticed that on this straight stretch of nothing highway, they saw a deer up ahead. They don't think anything of it, and they begin slowing the car down so the deer can safely pass. Well, they get right to the deer and come to a complete stop, and they notice that something's kind of strange about this deer. It's extremely skinny, its ribs are poking through its fur, which chronic wasting disease is very real, but that doesn't really explain what the deer does next. When it does finally move, which takes a long time, it's just frozen completely still for a really long time, it's walking kind of weird. Has like a wider walk than it should, it's moving like it doesn't really know how, and it's going extremely slowly across the road. Also not normal for a deer. They all but skip. Then the follower finds themselves in a trance, just staring at this deer. They don't know how long has passed at this point. When they snap out of it, they gently lay on their horn to try and encourage that deer to get out of their lane, because all of this time has passed and it's walking so slow it's still in that lane. Finally, the deer gets out of the lane and they keep driving, and they try not to think about that at all until they wind up on my side of TikTok, where we talk about deer that aren't really deer, which leaves them to question, what the hell did they see on that night? But this story is not one that I would recommend listening to at night, especially if you have to make a nighttime drive in the near future. There was another story recently that had a warning like that I read, so we're 2 for 2 this week on the scary nighttime drives. Do you guys hear Wednesday in the background? She's like, please don't listen to this if you're gonna be scared. Right, Wednesday? Are you just looking out for him, Wednesday? So this story comes from a follower in Vancouver, Washington. So the area is surrounded by trees and country land, and it can be a little bit spooky at night. So when this follower found themselves riding home with their dad late at night, they decided to put the spookiness aside and roll down their window and get some pretty pictures of the scenery. And I don't blame them. So they're driving through the woods, and the follower's still taking pictures, and they notice up ahead of them that there's someone on the edge of the road. Looks like a construction worker, at least they're wearing the clothes of a construction worker. So the follower notices when they get closer that this construction worker is not looking at the road at all, but rather their back is turned to the road and they're staring deep into the trees. So when they get closer, the follower's still watching them, and they watch as their head turns completely around to meet the car. Completely around. Their dad never said anything. And that's unlike him, because they both experienced this, and the follower definitely thinks that he was following the if you see something weird, no you didn't rule, just to not say it out loud. And they wrote in the story to let everyone know, while the woods in Washington state are absolutely gorgeous, they are absolutely terrifying, and you should be wary. 6 months prior to this story is when activity started for this family. So it starts with they and their sister walking home one night at around 8:30 p.m. and they notice a dark shadow figure dart by the front of their house. The next occurrence happened at around 3 or 3:30 early one morning, whenever they were hanging up the phone with one of their friends. They hear from their open window a high-pitched whistle, but not before everything around them went completely silent. All of the wildlife outside was silent. They said they're familiar with local wildlife, and that was nothing that they had ever heard before, especially at night. Around 2 days later, they and their sister walking in the house through the garage, and the sister sees a shadow dart by, says hello, and then the follower's like, hello, what are you talking about? And the sister's like, I just saw a shadow run by. So, what is going on here? It seems like a lot of stuff. But the follower believes that it is all tied in with the opening of their father's restaurant, because as soon as he opened it, that's when things started happening and things started being weird. And it's not just the family. People that come to this restaurant to eat report seeing shadow figures move around on top of other things. So, what's going on here? I recommend doing a cleansing of the restaurant for sure, and then a cleansing of the house, and maybe putting up some wards and barriers on your house just so your living space is safe. But it definitely could be connected to the restaurant if you're experiencing both things. There's also a possibility that something is connected to one of you, and you're in the restaurant, so it's happening at the restaurant as well, but it's actually you. You know what I mean?